A little girl walked from farm to farm carrying nothing more than a faded canvas bag. Every weekend, she knocked on weathered doors and asked the same unusual question. "Do you have any old horseshoes you're throwing away?" Most people laughed before she even finished speaking. Some farmers tossed rusty horseshoes into the bag with a grin, joking that she must be building the world's ugliest collection. Others teased her, calling her the junk collector, as neighbors watched from their porches. Children her age whispered and giggled whenever they saw her walking down the dusty road with another piece of rusted iron hanging from her shoulder. But the girl never looked embarrassed. She simply smiled, thanked each person sincerely, and continued toward the next farm. Her name was Emma Carter, and she was only 10 years old. She lived with her widowed mother in the old farmhouse her grandfather had built decades earlier on the edge of Maple Creek, a quiet farming community where everybody knew everyone else's business. The farm wasn't large anymore. Most of the land had been sold years before her grandfather passed away, leaving behind only the house, a small vegetable garden, and an aging wooden barn that leaned slightly to one side every time the wind blew. People often wondered why Emma spent so much time around that abandoned barn. Its roof sagged. Its paint had almost completely disappeared. The windows were covered in dust, and the heavy wooden doors barely opened anymore. Yet every Saturday afternoon, after collecting another horseshoe, Emma disappeared inside for nearly an hour before returning home. Nobody knew what she was doing. Nobody cared enough to ask. They simply assumed children imagined strange games. Only Emma remembered the final conversation she had shared with her grandfather. He had been lying in his hospital bed, noticeably weaker than she had ever seen him. Even then, his hand still carried the rough calluses of a man who had spent an entire lifetime working the land. He squeezed her small hand gently. His voice had barely risen above a whisper. "Promise me something." Emma nodded. "If people ever throw away old horseshoes." He paused, catching his breath. "Bring every one of them home." She frowned. "Why?" A warm smile appeared across his tired face. "Because one day." He looked directly into her eyes. "Every horseshoe will find its way home." She waited for him to explain. He never did. Just 3 days later, he passed away peacefully. Most adults dismissed those words as the confused thoughts of an old farmer nearing the end of his life. Emma never did. For 2 years, she remembered every single word. That promise became part of her routine. Every horseshoe she collected was carefully cleaned with an old wire brush before she carried it into the barn. She never sold them. She never displayed them. She simply stored them exactly where her grandfather would have wanted. Or at least where she believed he would. One warm autumn afternoon, Emma sat outside the barn cleaning another horseshoe someone had pulled from an abandoned pasture. Layers of rust slowly flaked away beneath the brush. Then something caught her attention. Tiny scratches. No. Not scratches. They looked deliberate. She rubbed away more rust using a damp cloth. Hidden beneath years of corrosion appeared a small carved number. 23. Below it was a strange symbol she had never noticed before. Emma stared silently. Surely someone had marked this horseshoe years ago. Curious, she rushed inside the barn and grabbed another horseshoe from one of the wooden shelves. She cleaned part of its surface. Another number appeared. Different. Alongside another unusual symbol. Her heartbeat quickened. One by one, she examined several more. Every single horseshoe carried its own carved number. Every single one also carried a different symbol. This couldn't possibly be a coincidence. That evening, instead of eating dessert, Emma found one of her school notebooks and began carefully drawing every horseshoe, copying each number and symbol exactly as she saw them. Hours passed. The pages slowly filled. Patterns started appearing. Certain symbols repeated. Some numbers seemed connected. Others appeared completely random. She couldn't understand what any of it meant. But she knew one thing. Her grandfather had never asked her to collect ordinary pieces of scrap metal. Each horseshoe had been marked intentionally. Someone had wanted them found again. Someone had expected them to return to that old barn. Emma closed the notebook and looked toward the dark silhouette of the barn outside her bedroom window. For the first time, collecting horseshoes no longer felt like keeping a promise. It felt like solving a mystery that someone had waited decades to reveal. The next morning, Emma skipped her usual walk and climbed into the dusty attic of the farmhouse instead. If her grandfather had carved those numbers himself, there had to be something else he had left behind. Sunlight slipped through cracked boards as she searched through old trunks, broken tools, and faded family photographs. Hours passed before she noticed a small wooden box tucked behind an antique saddle. Inside was a worn leather notebook. Across the first page, in her grandfather's careful handwriting, were the words, "When every horseshoe returns home, the truth must return with them." Emma's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Most contained sketches of horseshoes, each labeled with matching numbers. Then she stopped on one page that made her heart race. A drawing showed the inside wall of the old barn. Exactly 48 horseshoes were hanging in a precise pattern. Emma immediately counted the horseshoes she had collected. 47. She counted again. Still 47. One was missing. The notebook offered no clue about where it might be. For the first time since beginning her collection, Emma felt discouraged. She searched every corner of the barn, hoping she had simply misplaced one. Nothing. That afternoon, she remembered an elderly farmer named Walter Briggs. His farm had once bordered her grandfather's property before most of the surrounding land had changed ownership decades earlier. When Emma politely asked if he had ever seen an old horseshoe marked with unusual symbols, Walter froze for the briefest moment. Then he forced a smile. "I think you're chasing fairy tales, sweetheart." His answer sounded rehearsed. As Emma turned to leave, something caught her eye. Burned into the wooden frame of Walter's stable door was the exact same symbol she had copied from one of the horseshoes. She looked back at him. His friendly smile had disappeared. Without another word, he quietly closed the stable door. Emma walked home with more questions than answers. Someone knew exactly what those symbols meant. And someone clearly didn't want her asking. 3 days later, Walter unexpectedly appeared outside the Carter farmhouse carrying an old burlap sack. Without looking Emma in the eye, he handed it to her. "I found this while cleaning an old storage shed," he said quietly. "It belongs with the others." Inside lay the missing horseshoe. Number 48. Before Emma could ask another question, Walter simply tipped his hat and drove away. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Emma carried every horseshoe into the barn. Following her grandfather's drawing, she carefully hung each one exactly where it belonged. She stepped back. Nothing happened. No hidden door. No strange sound. No secret compartment. Only silence. For several minutes she stood staring at the wall. Had she misunderstood everything? Disappointed, Emma picked up an old broom and began sweeping the dusty floor. Suddenly the broom struck something solid beneath loose wooden planks. A dull metallic sound echoed through the empty barn. Curious, she knelt down and brushed away decades of dirt. There, hidden beneath the floorboards, was an old iron ring. She pulled. The wooden panel lifted just enough to reveal a concealed latch built into the foundation. Her heart pounded. With all her strength, she pulled again. A section of the barn wall slowly shifted inward. Behind it wasn't a vault of gold or stacks of cash. It was a perfectly preserved room. Dust covered nothing inside. Shelves lined every wall, filled with carefully labeled boxes. Neatly tied bundles of letters sat beside thick folders containing land deeds, handwritten journals, faded photographs, tax records, and county maps stretching back nearly 50 years. Emma opened the nearest journal. Her grandfather had written almost every day. Page after page described struggling families who had suddenly lost their farms after signing papers they didn't fully understand. Some signatures had clearly been forged. Some deeds had been altered. Others had been obtained through threats and deception. As she continued reading, one family name appeared again and again. The Hawthorne family. The wealthiest family in Maple Creek. Respected. Admired. Generous donors to every school, church, and community project. According to her grandfather's records, their fortune had not been built through hard work alone. It had begun with fraudulent land transfers that quietly pushed honest farming families off their property. For decades he had gathered evidence, waiting until every document could no longer be denied. Then illness had stolen the time he needed to finish. The horseshoes had never been keepsakes. Each one had hidden a numbered key to prove the records were authentic and complete. Without all 48, no one would believe the evidence. Inside the final box, Emma found one sealed envelope. Across the front were just 7 words. To the one who brought them home. Tears filled her eyes as she opened it. Her grandfather wrote that truth without kindness becomes revenge, but truth with compassion becomes justice. He didn't want anyone destroyed. He wanted every family to know their history had not been forgotten. In the weeks that followed, lawyers verified the documents. County officials reopened decades-old records. Reporters uncovered a scandal that reached back generations. Several descendants recovered family land, while others finally received compensation and public acknowledgement of the injustice their grandparents had endured. Walter Briggs eventually admitted he had hidden the final horseshoe because he feared powerful people would bury the truth forever. Instead, a 10-year-old girl had protected it. Months later, the abandoned barn became a local historical landmark. Visitors no longer came to see old horseshoes. They came to remember how one child refused to believe that forgotten things were worthless. The same people who once laughed at Emma now lowered their heads with quiet respect whenever they passed the old Carter barn, because they had learned a lesson that would outlive them all. Sometimes the smallest hands uncover the biggest truths.